Welcome to Podcast on TechNation. This is a series of podcasts focused specifically on the biomedical and HTM industry. Episodes will be added monthly. Listening to each episode is eligible for 1 CE credit from the ACI. At the conclusion of this episode, you will be able to access a link that will take you to a quick survey. You'll be able to download your certificate once you submit the survey. Before we begin today's podcast, I'd like to invite you to save the date for our upcoming MD Expo in Dallas, Texas on April 16th and 17th. You can find more details and registration for the show at mdexposhow.com. In this episode, we are joined by Joey Smith, Cybersecurity Engineer at Space Labs Healthcare, David Yeager, Biomed Security DBA Pro Healthcare Incorporated, and Ben Stock, Director of Healthcare Product Development of Order.
Hi, my name is Ben Stock. Welcome to the TechNation podcast. Today I am joined by Joey Smith, Cybersecurity Engineer at Space Labs Healthcare, and Dave Yeager, Biomed Security DBA at Pro Healthcare. We will be discussing the medical device security position that goes by many different names, but covers IT security for medical devices. I'd like to introduce Joey Smith and Dave Yeager and give them a chance to introduce themselves. Joey, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Ben. Like Ben said, my name is Joey Smith. I am currently a cybersecurity engineer with Space Labs Healthcare. Prior to Space Labs, I worked for a number of healthcare providers dealing with medical device security with respect to both IT security department as well as within an HTM department.
And Dave, could you do a quick introduction, please?
Yes, thank you, Ben. And Joey, good to be with you here today. My name is Dave Yeager. I am the Biomed Security DBA, as Ben mentioned, for Pro Healthcare. Currently been in that position for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was a PACS administrator for the same organization. And then prior to that, I was a service engineer for one of the manufacturers of healthcare equipment. So looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Dave. And my name is Ben Stock. I'm the Director of Project Support in the Healthcare Division for Order. Prior to being with Order, I was with SSM Health for 18 years in the HTM department. One of my hats at the time was the cybersecurity portion of medical devices, where we started up a kind of medical device security program from scratch. So as we discuss this, we'll go over our different experiences and what we've seen in these positions, things that we've done, things that we've seen done, and things that may have been done that we would have probably done different at this time. So to start it off, I'd like to talk about why this position is important, why organizations should have someone dedicated to medical device security and it not just roll up to either an HTM title or to a security title. David, you want to start us out?
Sure. So, my experience in this role, well, let me back up a step. Pro Healthcare has been looking for this position for about 6 or 7 years now, and the director kept getting denied. And then a magical thing happened. WannaCry security vulnerability came out, and upper management asked my manager, who's doing that, and why don't we have a security analyst, position? So my position was created. My belief is that medical devices are unique to the network. Their profile that sits on a network is very unique. So I think having somebody in this position with the knowledge base of medical devices is key. And we'll get into a little bit more about what requirements are necessary, but definitely having a medical device background and understanding of medical devices and how they play on the network is very instrumental to this.
Thanks. And Joey, you came from a little different background. You came out of security.
Thank you.
You came out of security and then had to learn the medical side of it. From that aspect of it, coming from security and then learning the medical side of it, what key parts did you see that were very important and why we have to have a position that's not just security based?
So I believe, I think one of the realizations that I had when I entered the role, because when I started the role, I was in an HTM department and not in security, and it was my first time into healthcare. And I thought the structure was a little strange to start out with, but one of the things I grew to appreciate in that capacity was that, I, as a member of HTM, I had a vested interest in basically in ensuring the continuity of patient care operations from the HTM perspective. And from the security side, coming in as just a pure security person with no medical or healthcare background, really. My approach initially was, we need to get X controls on these devices. We need to do this. We need to do that. And in a way that it's too, I grew to learn that's too, I don't want to say not too proactive, but it's too, the solutions aren't that simple. And so as being a member of HTM allowed me to be more involved in the conversations and work with the right people that service these devices to understand, okay, how do we, we need to do something about updating this device. We need to do something about locking them down. We need to do something about maybe just removing it from the network. What does that look like? How does that impact clinical workflow? How does it impact patient care? How does that impact how the device is serviced and maintained? So I think there's sort of there's the puritanical security role, which is still, I think, very important for an organization to have. But when you get into the nuances of ICS-like systems, kind of like medical devices, you kind of need to have someone dedicated that really has to think about those problems and come up with creative solutions to resolve them.
Yeah, I think it's a key differentiator in between security and medical device security. When security, you're worried about securing the asset, securing the data, and the end user's experience, although important, isn't necessarily the primary concern when you're instituting your security protocols. But with a medical device, the end user, it's life dependent. So if there's an error or something you causes that equipment to do something improperly, it's a lot more catastrophic than if it's someone can't log in at a particular time. And really taking those concerns into account is really what makes the position special, and the ability to look at both sides of the equation. Dave, did you have anything more to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking about our organization's changing of a security posture with passwords. We're looking to implement a 16 to 18 character password for IT devices, but you just can't do that on medical devices for multiple reasons. Vendors aren't going to let you. The keystrokes are just going to be too much for the end user to remember. So yeah, unless LDAP's involved, changing medical device passwords is just a very tedious task.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I think Joey has something to add, but my, a lot of them are hard coded into the device. I can think of a few medical devices that changing the login admin password can bring the whole device down, and that's a design error on the manufacturer side. Luckily, it's a lot of older equipment, and manufacturers have really started focusing on security. But we do have a lot of legacy 10, 15-year-old pieces of equipment that still have that type of a protocol. Joey, anything to add there?
Yeah, so I was thinking, 'cause I guess a bit of a spoiler here. I mean, you were the one that hired me into basically to enter the healthcare field. I mean, what was that journey like, I guess, prior to hiring me?
So yeah, I'll go into that. Great question.
Try to realize it.
Yeah, so the role was actually filled by one person before I hired Joey a number of years ago. And my initial thoughts going into this role, being 18, at that time probably about 12 to 15 years in the HTM role. HTM people are very proud, and we think we're great. We got this medical thing under control. We've been doing it forever. So I went with the approach of looking for someone inside the HTM program that had a good IT knowledge and skill set. And it worked, but it didn't work well because when you look at an organization in general, you look at the security department, you look at the HTM department, depending on the size of the organization, you're going to have a significant larger population of your employment is going to be in the HTM department. There's more resources. Security is generally a smaller team that covers a lot of area. So that person who needed to help understanding the security side didn't have the help and support they needed. And then when I went to redo it and we were hiring again for that position, I went the other route, the opposite, and I went to hire someone who had an extensive security background because we had the resources on the HTM side to help support the medical side and help teach that side. In my opinion, it worked out better that way. I'm not saying that you can't take someone that's in HTM and bring them up to that level, but you just have to make sure that they have the support within the organization from the security team to get them over those hurdles of things that you don't learn being a biomed. And I think, Dave, you have a little different story. You came from a PACS background. I don't have any experience.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how that worked?
Yeah, exactly. Again, like you were saying, you can come at this position from multitude of different directions, but my particular direction was that I was in IT. I was a PACS administrator for about 10 years, and this position happened to open up, and I just looked at it. It's like, well, they were looking for somebody with IT background. And the ability to work with the IT teams, as well as a medical device background. And so I didn't have a lot of medical device background. I always tell a bit of a story about I thought I knew biomed, and so I got into biomed. I knew the imaging side of biomed, but the biomed side of biomed was quite different. Infusion pumps and anesthesia machines and all that stuff. I really had no knowledge of that. So me, kind of positioning into this, this position, I guess, was a really good fit for both. Just because I had been with the organization for 10 years, I knew most of the IT folks. I knew the security teams. I knew the networking folks. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel with introductions on how that worked. And I think it allowed me to jumpstart this position into a pretty good role as it is now.
Thanks. And Joey, you had a different experience. You came into an organization not knowing the HTM side, and then also not knowing the security team. What tools and processes did you use to work with the security team to ensure that relationship was good, and you had that communication you needed, even though you weren't part of their team?
So in an effort to, I'm going to break it down as, kind of the way to get things done, functionally, I think one of the core components is following ITIL standards and how work is conducted. So following change control management, following communications management, and facilitating between, kind of being a liaison between the security team, between the HTM teams, between potentially other stakeholders to try to bridge the knowledge gap between medical devices and regular IT devices. Because I think one of the biggest challenges that I remember dealing with security teams in the past is that the IT mindset is to kind of treat medical devices that are on a network as, broadly speaking, an IT device. Something you can put XYZ controls on, put all this client software on, you can do all this stuff to manage it, when reality is that the majority of the devices can't do that with. And you have to kind of be able to translate that, or I think someone who could be successful in the role would have to be able to translate that between, from clinical speak to security speak, or the other way around, to affect that change. It wasn't something that I was able to do in 3 or even 6 months. I'd say to fully build that relationship. I think I did eventually, at least in our SSM days, build that relationship. But it takes time. It takes time and effort. It may take probably something going wrong to force some relationship sometimes. Not necessarily from a severe security incident, but sometimes just a security control going wrong, causing impact. It's trying to build up the education on each side and understand why each side's perspective matters.
So I think we've looked at 3 different routes, and there's many more than that, coming in from the IT security side, coming from the HTM side, and then Dave's route from coming from the PACS side, and going into that. And we've discussed, the HTM, and what that is. We've really defined what HTM is. HTM is an encompassing term for healthcare technology management. It started out as biomed, and then kind of progressed up to clinical engineering, and then now is the accepted term of HTM. It really encompasses positions that are all healthcare technology, not just medical equipment, which brings that security position kind of under the umbrella of HTM. Some organizations are going to see it as an IT position. Some are going to see it as an HTM position. And my personal opinion is, it's just that silo, not really a silo you're in, but the position you're in. The thing you have to remember is you have to communicate between both organizations. Like Joey just said there, even though he was in an HTM silo, he worked directly with the IT security team. And if you were in an IT security team, but your role was over medical devices, that communication to the HTM department is critical for this position. So saying all that, if you were looking at hiring for a position like this, who do you think would best fit this role? And we've covered that quite a bit, but what would your perfect candidate look like? Joey?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I think it depends on who's doing the hiring. And I think whoever's doing the hiring should hire someone who comes from the other role, meaning, kind of the example you described with hiring me, Ben, hiring a security person to fill the role in the HTM department. And I think likewise, finding an IT savvy person who is from the HTM side would fill the role if it's reporting up to security. The reason being is, again, there's going to be the gap of knowledge in that role in that department that they're in, but there's also going to be, they're fulfilling that gap in knowledge that that department doesn't have. So, I was in HTM. I didn't know pretty much anything about HTM when I joined the organization, but I knew a lot about security, and I was able to over time build the fill a gap, and then build up I think enough of a relationship to work towards filling the other gap. Yeah, so hopefully that made sense.
No, it did. Thank you. And Dave?
Yeah, I agree with what Joey said, absolutely. And in addition to that, I would, from a generic standpoint or qualification standpoint, I think that that person needs to be persistent, aggressive sometimes, especially with vendors. I'm looking at it from a vulnerability standpoint. When the vulnerabilities are identified from whatever government agency or potentially even the vendor themselves, it's sometimes a monumental task to get the patches necessary or the remediations necessary to fix that particular vulnerability. And sometimes vendors kind of slow-foot it, I guess is the best way to say it. I'll try to be nice as I can. But yeah, I mean, I think, being persistent and aggressive, being a good communicator, because, that's also a very big key into the, talking to your teams, either the IT team or, the rest of the HTM or biomedical engineers, just having them understand what your role is, understand, what you're trying to do, and try to get them, at least the biomeds, to understand that you're not trying to make their life more difficult. Sometimes it's perceived that way, but your position is really trying to protect the organization. I mean, that's pretty much what you're there for. Is just like security is for the IT side and the IT devices. You're doing the same thing in the medical device world.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, enablement is key, as in being able to enable that individual to complete the work in a functional as well as in a project management capacity. So what I mean by that is if this specialist is, let's say, within the HTM department, are they able to either directly or maybe indirectly through working with an analyst in the HTM department, can they create the checklist of the work orders to for how to conduct patching on a system? Can they, or if they're on the security side, are the individuals closely involved in change control management? And are they even, let's say, even in a dedicated change control management capacity as representative for or on behalf of HTM, for example? So if there are, let's say, security changes coming down for performing changes to a firewall, for example, they know that, okay, this has potential to impact clinical engineering or HTM. I need to communicate these changes out. But we need to be able to enable and even like delegate some capacity to those individuals to be functional within their role.
Yeah, I think you brought up a key point there too, that they do need to be, even outside of IT security, they need to be really immersed in the whole IT world when they do, and they need to be part of that change process, really not necessarily sitting on the committee, but receiving the information down and being able to speak up if they feel that anything that's coming down would negatively impact a medical device or patient safety is another key part of the role that we have not talked about yet. David, it looked like you had something.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that because that's exactly what we're looking at doing right now. Me coming from PACS or IT side, I was firmly aware of the change control process, and I continued attending the meetings on a weekly basis. And the key part is now they're actually including me in as a prover for some of the changes that they're doing, just for the simple reason is they're replacing wireless controllers at major facilities. Well, obviously we have a lot of wireless devices that are attaching to the network, and we need to know that if there's going to be an outage from X to X. So just including all that, including us in that process is very, very key, and I'm very appreciative of the IT department doing that.
Yeah, I think that you brought up wireless devices, and I think that was one of the eye-opening things. What we discovered was when you really looked at the wireless hospital network, it was a majority of devices were medical devices. They were not laptops, computers. The predominant devices were medical devices, and it was magnified when we brought infusion pumps online. So you're dealing with a network that's supported by IT, but the predominant receiver is medical devices, and they can be directly affected by the decisions IT makes, and we need to compensate for that.
I just want to, Ben, I want to add one point to that. What we're just doing here at our facilities is creating new S accounts or new service accounts or new connecting accounts for wireless networks specific for medical devices to isolate them from IoT devices or other devices. So we can kind of have a better control over the network from that aspect. So we know what's connecting, and there'll be 2 or 3 of us that know that service account and password. So we kind of keep that limited to the folks that need to know.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, definitely good controls there. So we've talked about a couple things with the position. I think another one we need to discuss is the person that is in this role also needs to be involved with the acquisition of equipment. For a while now, IT's had, in most organizations, IT's had some form of a checklist to validate the safety of equipment coming in. But I think the key role of a medical device security person in that acquisition process would be to ensure that the device manufacturers are taking security seriously. Device security for years was it was an afterthought. It was, okay, we'll put the product out there, we'll pick an antivirus software, we'll stick it on there and say, call it good. But manufacturers through the years have now started to adopt security at the beginning of the design of the product, which has helped out significantly. What do you gentlemen feel the role of that person in that role would be with acquisition of products? Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I'll start with this. So, yeah, our focus and our goal is to have me be at the table when we're doing procurement. The difficulty in that ideal is that usually doctors are the ones that are driven to purchasing equipment, and the demos are already done with the doctor, and the doctor's seen all the bells and whistles, and by the time it gets to anybody in the capital purchasing process, they're dead set on getting this particular piece of equipment. So it's really a focus change in the upper echelons of the organizations to be able to understand that security does need to be a part of the devices that we are purchasing. Ideally, I'd like to be in that process and see if there's a comparison that I could do between a couple of different vendors and see if their security posture, one is better than the other. Again, it's a goal. Hopefully we can get there at some point, but that's what we're looking toward to do.
Yeah, it's very important for the checks and balances to be done before the products are demoed. If it's done after, you've already lost that battle. So really injecting yourself in the process before the physicians get to see it is important. Joey, you've seen this from multiple angles all the way through manufacturer. What do you have to add?
So I will say, especially on the provider side, a lot of it is going to involve close partnership with supply chain, and kind of what both of you have already said or echoed, and being involved in the procurement or even just the proposal or RFI process as early on as possible, so you can catch this information ahead of time. Because like you said, Ben, it's I remember I dealt with a lot of cases to where we did the review, but the product was basically already going through the procurement process, and whether the product passed or failed our risk assessment process didn't really matter, because it was already, the contract was already signed, the dollars were being sent. From the manufacturer side, I'll say one of the I'll call it a challenge that I have had is that kind of similar to how on the hospital side you're seeing you're seeing many different forms of the same information presented by different manufacturers. So the MDS2 form is an industry standard, but once you get outside of that, a lot of documentation and artifacts, whether it's architecture diagrams, contracts, you name it, everything varies so widely that it's a time-consuming process to process kind of the same information at times. It's the same problem on the manufacturer side, except this time we're processing the risk assessments or similar documentation coming from potential customers. So it becomes I guess I'll put it this way. I remember when I was on the provider side and was having to go through those risk assessments, kind of once you hear something is already going through the procurement process, you kind of want to get something done quick, and you reach out to the vendor and you're hoping that they can get a response out quickly. Well, your vendors are going to be processing potentially dozens of similar documents all at the same time. And your bigger manufacturers may be able to have the resources to process that, but your smaller manufacturers may not. So there's definitely, I guess you call it an SLA to be understood on each side.
Yeah, I I think we could do a whole hour on documentation and non-standardization of document, the non-standardization of documentation, if that's a thing. But definitely that is a struggle on both sides. So I think we could probably cover that in a whole other section. So we've talked about, you know, what someone would do to get into a position like this. You know, if you were a biomed or an IT person, what are some resources out there that they could go to be prepared for a position like this if it did open up and they were applying for it? Dave, do you want to start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, you know, it depends on which side you're on, right? So if you're on the medical device side already, learning the IT stuff, there's a plethora of IT, you know, documentation, night classes, stuff of that nature. From my point of view, I think, you know, knowing how devices connect to the network is critical. How that you know, just that mundane, you know, part of what's an IP config, what's the networking stuff that we do, how does it kind of connect it to the network, the different versions of wireless connections you can do. Just having that knowledge base is you know, simplistic, it seems, but very critical in this position, because you need to know what, you know, how you're connecting. You need to know a lot about you know, the IT side with respects to how the networking does. You know, what are VLANs? You know, just kind of gathering that detail. There's probably some networking classes that you can take. You know, that you know, could probably be a night class 1 or 2, and you know, gain your knowledge that way. From, if you're on the other side, you're already on the IT side, knowing better, getting to know medical devices, you know, might be a little bit more difficult because there's a varied versions of that. Just understanding the differences between imaging equipment and medical devices themselves is pretty key. I think personally, seeing as I didn't know a lot about the biomed side, I was still able to come into this position and still function rather well with regards to just taking it back a step and saying, okay, it's a network device, and just understanding it's a network device and just, you know, moving forward with that. So it's kind of what I have.
Joey, any input on that?
Yeah, just kind of like what Dave was saying. It's it matters which side you're coming from. If you're someone from more the HCM or biomed side coming to the role and you learn more about security, there's endless free resources out there. There's I mean, there's the NIST framework, the CIS benchmarks. If you're looking more at controls, SANS, and any other security resources, if you're looking more for like guidance or news or threat intelligence, stuff like that. For me, since I had to learn more about the HTM side going to the role, really a lot of it, because I struggled to find, I guess, free classes out there, anything I could easily take advantage of. A lot of my learning was more on the job and shadowing, and I think it was one of my more, I guess, assumed duties within the role was that I did a lot of, I'll also call it clinical systems administration, and to support a lot of those clinical systems. That really kind of got me, you know, on the ground training, as it were, to learn a lot of this stuff. I think one other key component for me in trying to understand a lot of these devices is understanding them more from the security view of architecture, meaning it's understanding how devices are connecting and communicating end to end. So from, you know, bedside monitor all the way up to surveillance devices, you know, for telemetry, all the way up to a database server somewhere in a server cluster, all the way up to the MR. And it's looking at that not just from technical integrations, but also understanding what is the data flow, what is the business workflow, what are the fault lines, and trying to understand, and even if it's just basic understanding, trying to understand and appreciate where things can break down, or you know, who are the key people to talk to, well, if you're trying to implement a certain control within that whole architecture. So trying to understand the end-to-end configuration is key.
Yeah, I think one of the key things there, and it would be difficult in the current times with COVID, but the key things that you did was physically go out there and be with the HTM department so that they could see you and that you were invested in what they were doing. I think that went a long way to building the relationships we talked about before, but then also allowed you to gain knowledge a lot quicker because they're generally a lot more willing to share in person. So hopefully in the future, that's something someone could use to gain that information. Dave, you
and just,
go ahead, Joe.
oh yeah, sorry. I was going to add one more thing to that, which is that anytime I would send security work out that technicians didn't know how to do, even though I may have task lists or checklists or work orders that define it, was that I was occasionally, at least initially, would go out and help technicians do some of this work. It was kind of a mutual on-the-job training for each of us, but I think you if you're not familiar with the HTM world, you glean a lot more insight from watching someone service equipment directly than sitting behind a computer in an IT building somewhere, never ever meeting people face to face.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key values that the position added was when you were looking at when you're looking at a large system and it's a product of scale and you have a patch that affects we'll say 200 devices. And if you don't want each individual person that services those devices going and looking for the patch, installing it and finding problems and having to work through them, what the position allowed was one person would go find the patch. They would work with an engineer that was familiar with the device. They would install the patch and figure out if there were any hiccups or things, and then put a document together and then send that out to the rest of the engineers as a package. Here's how we do it. This, you might run into this, this, and this, and here's the file. So it really cut back on the amount of time the engineers were spending looking for things and doing double work that other engineers in the same organization were doing. So that kind of leads me into this question. And Dave, you brought this up earlier, that it took your organization a while to fund, to approve this position. What do you think are some of the key factors we can use to get our organizations to understand why these positions are so important, why they should fund them, and why they should dedicate a person or persons or group to this position?
Yeah, I think you just mentioned it. Having 25 different engineers going out and trying to find a patch for like devices, but in different facilities, is just a waste of time. They don't do that in the IT world. They have dedicated security folks that gather that information and disseminate it down to the folks that need it or patch it themselves. Obviously, I get that in the IT world they've got better tools to put a patch out to 100 different machines at the same time, but and we can't do that in the medical device world just because they're not connected to that server. But the key to getting this position, I think the bad actors aren't going away, and that's the unfortunate realization of our world today. And I think if you read the news, almost weekly, you're seeing ransomware or somebody's being affected in healthcare, not just necessarily in generics, but specific to healthcare. And so that needs to be understood. We have a duty to protect our patients and our patients' data and keep them safe. And so, having that knowledge out there that, the bad actors are out there trying to do something, whether it's, steal our data or prevent that CT scanner from doing its job, we have that duty to help protect that. And I think leadership is really starting to understand that more and more. I don't know the bean counters what they think about that, but I think that creating a role and creating one of us, creating one of me, I guess, is I'll say it bluntly, is a lot cheaper than paying ransom for 3 million records that were stolen from and sold on the black market. So I think just the logic out there that the bad actors aren't going away, and they're really trying to affect our lives. And I think small investment on the front side can go a long ways.
Yeah, I would add to that, not that they're not going away, that they're increasing. That healthcare is becoming more of a target than it ever has been in the past. And there's multiple reasons for that. At the beginning, the ransomware was being paid by healthcare organizations because it impacted them so greatly. And then later, just because it makes the news and they have the ability to attack devices that are on the easier side, because healthcare, the product life cycle is so long. It creates targets, and in a target-rich environment, you're going to have bad actors try to take advantage of that. And another thing you mentioned was that the ability to stop it, but there's you're not going to stop it 100% of the time. And having a key person in that role when something bad does happen, that can bring everyone together and understands both sides is very important. I remember an incident where we had a particular piece of medical device that was infected. They saw it, they isolated it, but it was a key treatment device that was needed, and the IT thought was, well, we'll just pull it offline, we'll analyze it, see what the breach was, and determine it. And this was going to be a 2 to 3 to 4 day process, and it was not acceptable. And we brought in some people, and we came up with a solution that got the piece of equipment back online, and also got the information to determine that there was no breach, so that we could follow through with the investigation. So, treating medical devices like a standard desktop is not what cannot happen in a healthcare environment. So, Joey, any thoughts on what organizations can do to help justify these security positions?
So something I have found to be successful on both sides of the pond, as in manufacturer and provider side, is I just point to tangible incidents that have happened or been, celebrated, it's not the right word, but have been noticed in the news. So WannaCry is obviously probably one of the biggest ones. But there's other data breaches. There's a case end of last year where the death of a woman in, I think it was Germany, was attributed to a ransomware attack impacting a hospital, and they had to reroute the ambulance she was in. Like, it's cases like that that kind of show that, like, hey, what if this particular case were to happen to us? What if this were to happen to our product? What if X vulnerability is found in our products, and we have to, we have to, we're not proactively trying to find this or identify this and fix it, then it becomes not just an operational risk, but a business risk as well. And you have to be able to communicate that to the people who may not understand either IT security or clinical operations, but they understand, the dollars and cents, or maybe you have to figure out how to play to all the key stakeholders within your organization. And unfortunately, security is kind of it's kind of perceived as a sunk cost, because you never really realize the value of security until something bad happens.
Yeah, I think that is, it's I don't know if you want to put it this way, but a necessary evil that the organizations have to have. They have to pay to have these security personnel that are there for the what ifs. So, we can all preach about the what ifs, and what if this happened, and what if that happened, and this is the impact to the organization. And I think that should be part of the conversation. But I think the leading part of the conversation should be what we talked about earlier, which is that economy of scale, and the ability to get the HCM engineers back to doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is repairing equipment, not searching for patches, and not having everyone do the same legwork over and over again, when someone could do it once, and then send out a process that's repeatable. And I think if you present it in a way that allows the organization to see the value of the position, more than they're here to protect us if something bad happens, or to keep us something bad from happening, but that they're there to help increase the operational efficiency of the organization, it'll go a long way in helping get a position like this approved. Well, we're coming up on time. Oh, go ahead, Joey.
I want to add one more point. So I think one more key takeaway with that is being able to define metrics of success for the work that's being conducted, or that will be conducted. So as an example, we were dealing with WannaCry during our past lives. And no, we identified X number of devices, and over the course of some amount of time, we identified that we were able to remediate or patch like 90% of those devices. Being able to show those metrics and show success and kind of try to compare that to what it was like before there was a dedicated specialist, before he started dedicating resources to dealing with security of medical devices, I think could show kind of where the progress is and could show the return on investment.
Yeah, that's a great point. Dave, did you have something to add?
Well, I was just going to say you could technically put a dollar value to that based off who has been affected and what costs they incurred during that downtime or vulnerability, denial of service, whatever the case may be. I mean, there's typically reports out there that says how much dollars it costs that organization. You can use that as another justification.
Yeah, I think you could look at that at very, very micro or macro scale. You could look at, hey, what if one CT was affected and it was down for 2 days, and you could put a dollar figure on that. But then it expands out from there. If the EHR, it would not be something that this person is responsible for. But if a medical device then pivoted and they got into the EHR, taking that down, the impact to the organization is definitely higher than one particular device. So there are ways to do that. Those are prospective losses. They're not tangible, but they are a great tactic to get you to have that aha moment that they really open their eyes and say, this is something that can greatly impact our organization, and we really should consider dedicating resources to it. So we're coming toward the end of our time. Any final thoughts you'd like to wrap up, or any words for people that are looking to get into a position like this? Joey?
My final thought was going to be more of a question for everybody, but I guess, what do you perceive as being one of the biggest risks, or the biggest risk for the HTM environment in the near future?
Well, I think the lack of knowledge, not the lack of knowledge of the individuals, but the lack of knowledge of what we have on our network is the biggest hurdle we need to overcome. It's not a shameless plug, but it's kind of the reason I am with the organization I am with now, is that is where I saw one of the biggest holes, is that we don't know what we need to protect. And a lot of organizations have made the step to get a system in that allows them to see all the devices on the network, but many out there haven't, and they're still relying on the data that's being manually entered into their CMMS databases, and getting that data accurate, so that when we do have threats, that we can identify what devices are affected by that threat quickly and remediate them is I think one of our biggest hurdles we have to overcome, because it is difficult even once we know them to remediate them, but if we don't know them at all, then we don't even know where our holes are. So, Dave?
Yeah, I concur with that, and tools are always valuable in this environment. The more accurate tools that you have on the network, or sniffing the network, and it's not necessarily a sniffer, but passively looking at the network, the better off you can be. As far as this role specific, it is fun. It is exciting. It's at sometimes breathtaking. If there's a vulnerability that's egregious enough that all hands need to be on deck, then your days are well spent. Preparation is always a key. To your point, just as you just said, Ben, knowing your inventory, knowing what's on the network, knowing where it is time saver, to the nth degree. But there is some frustrations to this role, just knowing that you've got a vulnerability out there and waiting on that vendor, not to pick on Joey at all, but waiting on that vendor to supply that patch for you, or authorize that patch, or just that's always the time consuming delays that are always a little bit frustrating. But I think this is been for me a real rewarding job. I think I'm doing a great value to the organization, and I think that's, if you're looking for something that can be rewarding, this is a really good position to be in. You know, I don't know about other organizations. I'm kind of left on my own, so I do have some metrics I have to meet, but I'm not hounded by you know, somebody looking over my shoulder and asking me what did I do today and what did I do tomorrow. So you can show your value in other ways, and I think it's just a very fun position to be in. It's definitely unique. It's a really unique position just because it does bridge over from IT and HTM. It's kind of a unique role to be in. So I really love doing it. So thanks for this opportunity to talk about it.
Thanks, Dave. And that reminded me, I don't know why this came into my mind though, but it was something actually that Joey started when he was in your role at a previous healthcare organization. You know, it's when items are on the network and you don't want to actively scan them. So we use passive tools generally to try to identify them. But when they're new, it's much easier. So Joey started a program where when we brought new medical equipment in, we would do an active scan of the equipment before we signed off on the install for the manufacturer. And it allowed us to get that data, at least at the beginning, so that we knew what was truly installed on there, and we could keep that in a database so that when we did see you know, vulnerabilities come up, we could see if that application was on that device. And it was a very successful program and a way to safely scan the devices without impacting patient care. So with that, I want to thank you both, Joey and Dave, for coming on and talking to us about medical device security, the position, and what it would take to be in that position. I personally think it's an extremely important position to organizations, and I hope we've given you some information that allows you to either, if you're in one of these positions, to grow, or to take this back to your leadership and say, hey, this is something we need. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Joey, David, and Ben, for a great presentation. And thank you to Order for sponsoring today's podcast. For more information about Order, please visit their website, order.net. If you enjoyed today's episode, you might enjoy our ongoing webinar series, Webinar Wednesday. You can find a calendar of upcoming live webinars, as well as an archive of on-demand webinars at WebinarWednesday.live. To obtain your certificate for 1 CE credit from the ACI, please remember to click the link located below this podcast title to complete today's survey. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com.